without further ado from myself, can we both introduce the wonderful Chris Williams and Pete Gatenby?
Welcome to this 50th episode of Digital Disruption. We are here live at the Fold in Leamington. In this special episode, we're going to be exploring, will full end-to-end digital home buying and selling experience actually become a reality? Now, before we get started into this, we're going to be exploring this really interesting topic. We're going to show you just a short video before we introduce our panel. And that short video is here just to kind of bring a little bit of provocation to what it is that we're going to be talking about tonight.
Home buying in the UK is broken. All stakeholders across the ecosystem, from estate agents, brokers, lenders, law firms and vendors, universally have been trying to improve the customer experience through leveraging digital technology. Today, the current landscape looks like this. We have gone through the first phase of digital transformation. We call this the vertical phase, where incumbent stakeholders and vendors digitise component parts of the home buying journey. Everything from ID verifications, home searches, source of funds checks, communications, decisioning, etc. all now have some level of digitalisation. It's had a positive impact, but this first phase has created fragmentation. The process has bottlenecks, still contains risk, and fundamentally the customer experience isn't great. Property purchases still average more than 200 days. Whilst we've seen some progress, the stage is set for significant transformation, a transformation that has already started. We have now moved to the second phase of digital transformation, where we go from vertical digitalisation to horizontal. What is needed and what is coming is interoperability, where the ecosystem becomes connected, enabling a true end-to-end digital home buying experience. One where remortgages will be done in a day, if not hours, and sales and purchase transactions reimagined. This second phase is what is bringing true transformation to the UK home buying sector, and the stage has been set. Over the next few years, we'll begin to see exponential change. The important question is, are you a spectator about to be disrupted, or an active participant solidifying your place in the ecosystem?
Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel. I'm going to go left to right to make sure that you all know exactly who I'm talking about. So first and foremost, we've got Travis Scholes, Commercial Director at LMS. LMS is the preeminent provider of panel management services in the UK and have recently launched the National Property Transaction Network. With 30 years in the industry, LMS touches over 60% of all property transactions in the UK.
Alongside Travis, we're pleased to welcome Charlotte Raw, who's Head of Mortgages and Lending at Newcastle Building Society. Newcastle Building Society is a leading mutual dedicated to supporting home buyers and communities, known for innovation and exceptional services. It's driving digital transformation in the UK property market.
Next, we have Alastair Thornton, Director of Growth and Technology at Yopa. Yopa is a forward-thinking, hybrid, but digital-first, estate agency redefining how homes are bought and sold in the UK. Combining local expertise with innovative technology, Yopa offers a seamless, transparent and cost-effective property selling experience.
And finally, we've got Michelle Cutler, who's Chief Product and Technology Officer at Muve. Muve is a leading digital-first conveyancing firm, revolutionising the home buying process by combining cutting-edge technology with expert legal services. Muve delivers fast, more efficient property transactions for buyers, sellers, and industry partners. So thank you all for being here. So you all have a microphone in front of you, which we're going to have to ask you to use. Thank you very much. So thank you all for being here. It's fantastic to have such a diverse group of experts with us tonight. Each of you brings a unique perspective from different parts of the property ecosystem. And I know our audience is eager to hear your insights on the topic tonight. So let's get started. And that topic that's central to our discussion is achieving end-to-end digital transactions. So to kick things off, I'd like to hear from each of you. And the first question that we're going to be asking and talking around is, what benefits do we see end-to-end digital transactions actually producing? And Charlotte, I'd like to come to you first, if I may. So from your perspective as a lender, what are the key benefits to us actually achieving true end-to-end digital transactions from our customers and your partners?
Thank you. I'd say I think a lot of the work that lenders have done previously is getting that confidence that the borrower can actually either proceed with a home purchase. They're able to afford the loan that they want. They know that getting that mortgage offer as quickly as possible gives them that confidence. What's missing is the speed for the rest of the journey, and it still feels extremely slow. It probably hasn't improved, since I've started working mortgages, which was 1923, somewhere around that time. But yeah, there's a huge difference between that first part of the journey, which is really fast, it's really slick, and the rest of it just stops, and borrowers don't know what's happening. And I think that's a huge benefit to just speeding up that whole journey, getting information around the property, the legal transaction, getting everything up front as quickly as possible, and enabling that transaction to speed up overall. So, yeah.
Do you know, I assumed it was only 2023, so don't you worry. Travis, LMS play a key role in connecting stakeholders. How do you see the benefit of end-to-end digital transactions really improving collaboration and efficiency across the chain?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. It's quite loud, isn't it? I'll put it down here, out of the way. I think when you look at the home buying and selling process, I think you mentioned in the video, and it was a great voiceover, by the way, so we'll talk about that. Well done, Kirsty. It's quite fragmented, and no matter how much each individual stakeholders look to digitise the process actually got longer, as you kind of pointed out, Charlotte. It's over 200 days now as an average. The customer journey is quite fragmented. There's so much isolation in the process. So where LMS play a role is we have a distribution network of over 40 lenders. We see a substantial share of the market. We work with the majority of the conveyancing in the UK, I think 98%, big broker network, big EA network. Our job is to kind of be invisible and pull these partners together in a way where each individual stakeholder can benefit from an enhanced digital journey. If we take each individual stakeholder from the customer all the way through to HMLR, there's benefits in sharing information, absolute benefits in sharing information. Information that's being collected in a way now where it can be reshared and can be reused in a way that can add value to a process. That's something that's very, very new to the industry. So where LMS come in, we are the ones connecting the dots. That's kind of how we see ourselves. So behind the scenes, the national grid, as you might say, we understand that the customer belongs to a particular stakeholder. Our job is just to support that transaction in a way that makes sense, that we remove duplication. Where products and processes are being duplicated, we remove that from the journey, and actually everyone's got access to a single source of data truth that can inform a transaction to make it hopefully better and faster. But also more transparent, and for the customer, have a singular customer journey where they can really benefit from. So they've got that one place where they can surface information, give information, and understand what's going on. And hopefully, that's what we're working towards, not just as LMS, but as an industry. But I think it's really, really important to note that, back to that sort of siloed digitization, no matter how much each individual stakeholder tries to make the process better, until we create an interoperable platform, it's actually not going to get any better. That's as simple as that. No matter how much you make your process better, if the person down the chain is not working the same way you are, the process will take just as long as it is today. So interoperability is absolutely the key.
Travis, thanks very much for that. Really interesting points. Alastair, I'm going to come to you now. As an estate agent chain, you're often at the first point of contact for buyers and sellers. What benefits do you see in the realities of an end-to-end digital home buying and selling experience?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about why we do all of this, it's for the buyer and the seller. That they're really the heart of the entire journey. And what they're really interested in is getting the house sold at a price which is fair to both of them, getting that done in a reasonable time frame, and also in a stress-free way as possible. And I think that's what digital starts to be able to facilitate, is shorter transaction timelines, also mitigating some of the causes of fall-throughs and increasing the transparency, which then also helps with the nervousness and the stress of the situation. I think also we see a benefit at the macro level for the market as a whole, because where we start to drive more liquidity into the housing market, actually you then start to increase mobility, you start to increase the number of transactions. There's a clear correlation if you look around the world. Countries with more efficient housing markets, people within there move more often than they do in other markets, and we're one of the worst for that because it is so difficult. And then you compare the UK market to, say, Scotland, and people in Scotland move far more frequently than people who live in England, and it's all down to that friction within the housing market.
Yeah, that's interesting. Michelle, Muve specialises in conveyancing, which is often possibly the most complex part of the customer journey. How do end-to-end digital transactions create value for buyers and sellers and your partners?
I mean, I think to start with, I'd go back to what Charlotte said about the customer experience. We really want to improve that so that people get a much better, clean and seamless flow through. It can be very frustrating for them if things take longer than they think they should. But really, if we can achieve that, then we actually free our conveyancers up to spend a lot more time thinking about the legal advice and making sure the customer understands the advice that they're being given, than post-boxing inquiries and passing information from here and there. So I think, it's good for both sides. The customer gets a faster, more seamless experience, and the conveyancer gets to really focus on the things that they are there to do, that their legal expertise is there to make the difference with. So that's what we're really keen to see in the future.
Thanks, Michelle. I mean, it's interesting because there's a theme, isn't there, here, that, look, the benefits are speed. I mean, if there's one thing that's there, there seems to be this speed piece. But I guess also it's to do with predictability, being able to kind of understand when you can do things. I think each of you has sort of made points about that, customer experience. Michelle, I want to just stick with you for a second. What are the biggest challenges, though, that are preventing this from actually becoming a reality? Or what are the slowdowns? Because we've kind of been on this journey for quite a long time, or certainly most people in this industry will feel we've been on this journey for quite a long time. What are the challenges and what are the slowdowns?
I think a number of things. Obviously, there's never one particular cause for things like that, but the interoperability point is key. We are such a fragmented market, everybody with their own different way of doing things, certain solutions that only work if everybody is on them. I don't see that as being the way forward. I think that it's very difficult when you've got a fragmented market like ours to get a critical mass of people using the same technology. So that's definitely, from my point of view, a real challenge in anything that we do. We're thinking about, well, will it work on its own? Because we can't rely on the next person in the chain doing the same thing as us. So I think that's a massive challenge, and it doesn't matter what subject you're talking about, whether it's ID and ID sharing or, use of DocuSign for signing documents. It occurs at every stage of the transaction.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we're going to test Alistair's microphone now since you've taken the dodgy one. So let's see if this works. But you're up front, estate agents are right at the very, very beginning of the process and also engaged throughout, right? Where do you see the challenges and what are you facing in aligning that digital journey further down the chain from your vantage point?
I think a large part of the challenge is the fragmentation. Obviously, if you compare our market to other markets, there's more people involved in the transactions. You've also got the complexity of the chains. We've then also multiplied the number of agents, the number of surveyors, the number of lenders, so on and so forth. And I think that's where it becomes difficult, because you start to say, well, okay, I can have a direct relationship with my conveyancer, but then if there's any conveyancer in the chain who is missing from that process, then that's hidden, and it only takes one for the whole chain to fall apart. And so it's really the communication side which is the biggest challenge to getting right. And interestingly, you would have thought that digital would have made that easier, but actually it's fragmented the number of communication mechanisms, which actually makes it harder than it's ever been.
And I think, sorry to jump in, but I think actually in previous times when you would have picked up the phone to solve a problem with another conveyancer, we don't see that. We see huge trains of email going backwards and forwards. And from our point of view, we really try to stop that escalating and pick up the phone, do something about it.
Can I just jump in there? It's really interesting. It's the digital maturity of the individual players in a particular market segment. I mean, conveyancing is a really good example. I do think conveyancers get the rough end of the stick a lot of the time, to be fair. Having my first day at LMS, I do remember thinking within an hour, conveyancers are the problem, we'll sort them out, everything will be fine. And 3 hours later, I'm going, geez, they're not the problem. There's everything else is around them is the issue. But I think there's a tail, isn't there? There's a tail of estate agencies, there's telling brokers, there's even telling lenders to a certain extent, in particular conveyancers around digital maturity in terms of how ready they are for the next level of communication, how ready they are for interoperability, the suppliers they choose to help them complete their work. All of them have a level of maturity which doesn't align to a single set of principles. And if you're going to enable interoperability, you've got to enable a set of principles, a set of standards everyone needs to work within. But doing that across a vast industry is very, very difficult. And I think to do that even more so with supplier choice, it becomes even more difficult to gain. But we're now getting to a stage where the data required to complete a transaction is becoming standardised. We know what information we need to do. We've got law society forms and protocols. We're getting to a point now where we know there's a standard of information that we need to adhere to. And actually there's now a path, I think, to create a level of interoperability without taking away choice. We're still encouraging competition, one that we haven't had before. So I think it's quite an interesting time. But conveyancers are one of those stakeholders that have a very, very long tail of immature, kind of digitally mature, I should say, I'll take that back, partners within it that need to kind of recognise that there's a different way of working, but also they need people like the people in this room here today to help them on that journey, because they might not have the knowledge or they might have the experience or expertise internally to help them mature the way they need to. But the only way we get to a quicker process is by enabling that for all, I think.
Thanks, Trevor. Charlotte, just coming to you for a second, from a lender's perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenges to this?
I think our biggest challenge as a lender is probably around so we can't always compete on price, so products and reducing rates isn't going to work for us as a lender. We obviously focus on regionality lending, so what do our borrowers actually need from us, what's going to help them get into their first homes, borrow more. But in order to do that, we have to sort of have we need to differentiate in our lending policy. In order to do that and to get our name out there, that has to go through sourcing systems. But then we've got a different policy to every other lender, and every other lender's got the same problem. Sourcing systems they just can't manage all that data and the differences. And, we ask different questions on the application forms to other lenders. I think that's our biggest challenge. It's how do you raise your profile out there when you can't actually get your requirements across in sourcing systems. So that's a big challenge for lenders, I'd say.
But then it also comes through into the conveyancing when every transaction is a switch between this lender and that lender and what each one requires, and making sure that we've got that covered. So we puristically, we would like for there to be more consistency on certain things that seem quite similar but are individually different in small ways. But we don't know, what you guys see on your sides. It's really interesting to see why those differences are there.
I think summarising some of the things that have just been said there about the challenges, it seems as though interoperability is clearly something that everybody wants. I mean, at Novus we talk about this being HDI, or horizontal digital integration. If there's one metric we can probably all agree on that needs to be focused on, it is how long it takes to complete a transaction. And over the years, whilst we've had all of this great digitalisation, what we were trying to express in the video there was that digitalisation has been happening in vertical stacks, and in their component verticals that has a positive impact on the customer experience in its own little place. But when you join it all together, that one metric of how long it takes to transact over the last 10 years has gone up, it's not come down. So fundamentally, HDI, interoperability, is a critical component part to actually improving the customer experience. And kind of leading on from that, we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the benefits of this. I'd like to hear kind of what actions you're taking, your representatives from each part of the industry sector, And so we're quite keen to dig into kind of, well, what do you do within each of your organisations to actually enable interoperability and HDI? And Charlotte, I'd like to come to you first, sort of from Newcastle standpoint. What are Newcastle Building Society doing to kind of bring this together to facilitate end-to-end digital transactions?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a long journey. We've got a long way to go, to be honest with you. But that's a good thing, you know. We're looking at. Sorry, it's not me. It's not me. No, I'll break that one if I swap with you. It's like I said, we're on a journey. We know we are, and we've still got a lot to do, even just to improve internally. You know, we talked about that silo effect. We've still got that part of the journey to work on. Albeit we're well on our way. We've got a new lending platform. We've got, you know, we're trying to make the speed to offer and the speed to completion as fast as possible with what's within our control. But absolutely in terms of data, so working with like LMS, Secure Link, just trying to give as much information to conveyancers as possible so they're not having to query things with us. When it comes to surveyors, having a standardised response for surveyors and giving them as much information up front so again they're not having to refer things back to us if they've got queries on a property. Likewise, when a broker comes to us, we're not referring it to our valuers. We can answer those questions up front majority of the time. So yeah, but using all systems, so not having to rely on a person sat on a phone or an email, or so speeding up the journey that way. That absolutely helps. We've reduced the amount of queries that come through. And it absolutely has improved the speed to offer, but like I said, there's still a lot of work to do in that space, particularly from lenders in general. I think it's that you're absolutely right. It's that sharing of data. You know, we talk about ID is a really good example. If we could validate a customer right at the beginning of the mortgage journey, and then everyone else can use that validation. It feels crazy that we just keep doing the same validation over and over again for the same customers. Like, haven't I given you this? Because they don't see all these different companies needing that information. So it seems so simple, but we can help with that. I think what we need to do, I think you touched on it before, Travis, it's that buy-in, but everyone needs to buy into this. We all need to have a direction that we work on in terms of data and how we need to agree a way forward. Where do we hold that data? How do we access it? And we all need to be using the same sort of model. I think you touched on something before about conveyancers around. I was just thinking, I came from other lenders prior to Newcastle, and we used the UK Finance Handbook. I didn't know there was a BSA handbook. Why would you have two handbooks? They tell you the same things. So just really simple things we can do to just help be consistent in our approach.
Yeah, and the ID one is my favourite example. It doesn't make any sense. And I saw a few wry smiles, especially from yourself, Travis. And LMS play a unique role, some may say, in being the connective tissue between so many different actors in the process. What specific initiatives are you implementing to enable smoother and a more connected process?
I think the concept of kind of data interoperability has been around for a while. No one's ever done it in a live environment in a way where things like ID checks and searches and protocol forms are collected in one stakeholder group and shared with other stakeholder groups. Well, we've just done it. It's a live trial going on right now. The data's online. We're using Connells and 4 other businesses in the sector to prove that we can collect data in an estate agency, and that data can be reused throughout the process, including ID. Searches are being ordered at the point of a property being listed. Protocol forms are being filled in line with the Law Society forms. Customers are engaging. We have over 75% adoption from customers who are listing a property, who are spending the time and effort going and adding that data in. We've got a trust framework that sits behind those things where data is fed into, and the law firm is working at the back end and prepared to use that data because it can be provenanced and shared in a way that they feel comfortable with, which is LMS as that host and that distribution partner. So what we're talking about now, which has been a concept for such a long time, is now a reality. Those things we're talking about can be done. The difficulty is scale. Like, how do we get all those far-reaching parts of the industry all working to a singular set of principles? It feels to me, I've been in the industry kind of 5 or 6 years now, we're closer to that point than we have before, and I think I was talking to one of the guys before, talking about, we thought we were close 25 years ago, and I hope that's not the case, because I think it's going to be a waste of the next 20 years of my life, but it feels like all the building blocks are in place now where we can get access to real good quality data. I think one of the catalysts for change were material information in the estate agency, and then there's been a new kind of emphasis on data import that protects the buyer. That's then led to more data being collected at the front end. That's then led to a question like, well, that data's been collected, how can we reuse that to protect the customer? And then we've got this trust framework, and we've got networks like LMS who exist in a way where we've got a distribution channel where we can go and share information en masse. So we launched the National Property Transaction Network a few weeks ago on the back of the trial, and the back of what we see in a real live environment. All of this stuff can happen today, it can happen now. The technology's there, the data's there. All that's required is a singular network working in a singular set of principles that everyone buys into. Now that sounds pretty easy when I say it in a singular sentence. There is a pathway to this now. I think we are on that path, and our clients, from both a lender point of view, state agency point of view, and a conveyancing point of view, we're engaging with regularly to understand the nuance of those individual journeys. But what was, concept 12 months ago is now real, it's live, it's here, and we're proving it in a live environment. The feedback's been better than expected. There's a lot of work to be done to enable that for scale, but enabling for scale is about supplier agnosticity. I got that right, didn't I? I always struggle with that word. And making sure that, like I said, we cater for those organisations who are not digitally mature. I think we've got routes to do that. The build's bigger as a result of those things. But, the reality is here, is now. We're on the cusp of that right now. All we need is people to get the momentum behind it. We know government's not going to change anything anytime soon. This is up to private enterprise to solve this problem. If we are genuinely serious about making it go faster or create more transparency in the journey, the people in this room are going to be responsible for that.
I do agree with you. I think, in summary, it's collaboration, isn't it? It's about that collaborative piece. Alastair, coming to you, what are you doing at Yopa to make this a reality?
A large part of our focus is on transparency and making sure what is known is shown to both the buyer and the seller, and then supporting communication directly between the buyer and seller. We sort of take the view that if you think if you're at the train station, you're on the platform and the train doesn't turn up on time, you start to get nervous. Is it going to show up? Is it not? Those sort of things. Whereas actually just giving people the information of the train's delayed by 5 minutes or 10 minutes takes that stress out. It might not make the experience great, but at least it's less stressful. So we focus very much on that. We focus on integrating where we can, so directly with conveyancing, so when the updates come through, they're immediately visible. Obviously not only visible to the buyer and seller, but also to our agent who can then help and chase and those sort of things. But very much it's around that transparency piece, which is key for us.
The famous Rory Sutherland quote, I like that. That was good. Michelle, conveyancing, you're often at the very centre of the process when it comes to the complexities that are further downstream from the estate agents. How are you facilitating end-to-end digital? I can't speak, sorry. How are you facilitating end-to-end digital processes, and what does that look like for your team, but also your clients?
Well, I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record, because one of our focuses is definitely collecting as much information up front from our client as we can. We're not really seeing it coming through from estate agents at large yet, but it sounds like we will be soon, which is good. But we do that with our clients in collecting that information up front, trying to make sure that we don't duplicate what we're asking for at any point in the journey, so we store the data well and use it after that point. But we're also trying to be right on the cutting edge of piloting new software and entertaining new ideas so that we really get a feel for what works and what doesn't work, and that guides us in what we're interested in following next. But equally, big change takes a long time for all the reasons that we've just mentioned. So we also have a focus on, not baby steps exactly, but making sure that we are always optimising what we're already doing so that we make small gains as well as taking big ones at the same time.
I think the upfront information is an interesting one, particularly the new guidance around material information. I think if you look at Parts A and Part B, I think it's very unlikely or rare that people were getting historically to the point of making an offer without knowing that information. Some of the edge cases around broadband and stuff like that. The interesting stuff, and I think the stuff that makes the real difference, is what's in Part C. But even the guidance from trading standards is some of this information needs to be provided by qualified people, conveyancers, surveyors, so on and so forth. And yet you're trying to get agents to collect that up front. And what we have to be careful of, if you collect the data, but it's not trusted, or even worse, it's wrong, that puts us in an even more difficult situation.
Trust is the key word there. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to overcome. So one of the things I think the catalyst for change in our side of the fence is the OPDA's PDTF. Now, I appreciate there's quite a lot of abbreviations in one sentence, but the property data trust framework is, I think, for me, looks like that catalyst for a central repository where data can be provenance and shared and trusted in a way that we've never had before as an industry. It's 12 months old, it's in its infancy to a certain extent, but there is enough provenance around that law firms, lenders and estate agencies are buying into this way of working. I think without that trust framework, I think we're going to struggle. And I fully agree with that, but I do think there's a bit of a shining light in that space now. For the first time in my time in this industry as well, I think we've got a route forward to create a level of trust. And I think where LMS play a role in that as well is about being that kind of distributor of that trusted data, because of that distribution channel that we've got. We're already a trusted partner. We have most law firms coming to us for information. We've got that kind of connectivity. But the provenance is around that information being collected upstream. There's a new kind of form of kind of platform provider and material information upfront information providers hitting the market now who have got a level of data security behind them that I think is probably better than some of the onboarding tools in the conveyancing space at the moment. So I think there's a pathway to that. I think it's still quite young in its infancy, but I think we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you. I'd agree. And I think just summarising some of this is that you're all obviously doing things not just individually but collaboratively to kind of plumb this together. But there's a couple of points here that I'd like to make that kind of underpin this. One is, we touched on, or you guys all touched on, levels of digital maturity of some nature. There's been a level of digital maturity. I've had numerous conversations in the last 12 months where people have been saying to me, I've been hearing for years that this industry is going to change and transformation is going to happen and whatever else. It's all just kind of a load of hot air. But one point I'd like to sort of make everybody aware of is the maturity piece. And at Novus, we look at this quite closely, and we look and assess digital maturity, not just from the industry's perspective, as in you guys as the actors in the process, but we also look at it for digital maturity from the consumer. And what we saw, and what you will all see, that is in 2023, the digital maturity of both consumer and that of the actors in the process all reached a particular peak. From the consumer standpoint, that peak was that those over 50% of all mortgage transactions are done by digital natives. And we class digital natives as somebody that essentially is digital first. So they are comparing their experiences with your services as they would compare it by getting something from Amazon. And of course that might seem unfair because buying something from Amazon isn't like buying a house, but nonetheless the expectation is high. But the digital maturity across the industry sector has also reached a key point. Now what's missing, and we can see, we do have a graph that we can share, there's a bit of it's not a flat line, but as the digital maturity has increased over the last sort of 15 years, that's started to tail off. And it comes to Trav, your point about an enabler. And if we contrast this market with, say, the e-commerce market, and before you all jump down my throat, how can we contrast it with e-commerce? E-commerce is actually very complex. That Amazon delivery goes through no less than 29 different handoffs before it arrives the following day at your home. And you can even track the drive. So why can't we do that necessarily in property? The reason has been that the maturity element. And what we saw in 2013 in e-commerce was enablement through mobile and interoperability through cloud computing. That's now happened in this industry sector. The cloud native stuff is there and the interoperability is starting to take place, but it's the enablement of this that's going to accelerate it at scale. And that is starting to happen with the likes of these sorts of platforms and things that are coming into the market. And so I just thought to summarise that. The maturity thing is really important. I think as all of you go on that journey, that collaboration piece, the maturity is there to do it. And our invitation to everybody in this sector is collaborate around that.
Yeah, it's enablers. I think the plural is quite important. I think the shining light for me, that kind of light bulb moment, when I realised we couldn't do this by ourselves. This is not a singular entity or a part of the industry that's going to solve this problem. We talk about true collaboration and interoperability. There can be multiple platforms, that's fine. Social media exists on many platforms and shares information with each other. These things can coexist and they bring something new to the market. But that genuine light bulb moment was really like, any organisation that says, and has got these grand claims that can kind of solve this problem by themselves, it's absolute nonsense. It's going to require a market shift and the individual stakeholders en masse choosing and deciding to work in a certain way. I think that's what's quite important about this, and that's that precipice we're on now. Once that decision is made, I think it exponential in terms of growth and maturity in this space, but that decision needs to be made right now. I think that's where we're up to.
It's almost reactive, right, with digital, and nicely segues into the next part. Look, it wouldn't be a podcast in 2024 without a reference to artificial intelligence, right? So I lead the AI practice once I'm doing this nice little step change. But AI is already changing the way we all live and the way we all work, and will soon also change the way that we transact, whether we buy houses, the way we buy products online. And in fact, we're starting to see that already. And in the same way that digital natives are now taking over the home buying market, AI natives are beginning to come through the ranks. These are people who have learned to pass their exams using ChatGPT, have written and researched their dissertations using large language models, generating videos for their social media using generative AI. This is all happening before our eyes. We've now got a unique opportunity to strike while the iron's hot, to get ahead of the curve, because it's so accessible. So the very first question we've got is, where will AI make the biggest impact in the property transaction process? And we're going to start with yourself, Michelle. I've done a lot in the conveyancing space when it comes to AI, so I'm very intrigued to hear on this one. Michelle, as someone at the forefront of technology adoption, where do you see AI making the biggest impact in property transactions, particularly in the conveyancing journey?
I think one of the really exciting things is that we're at that stage of the industry where we just don't know yet. And that's really exciting to me, because it means that we get to test and try and explore in lots of different places. So the key there for us is to make sure that we are spotting the right ones, out there talking to people and trialling them quickly, learning and using those learnings in what we do next. I think as an overall comment, we'd really like to see AI making the biggest impact in the places where the conveyancer doesn't. So it's this mix between automation and AI, where we're dealing with data and gathering data, checking data, moving data, and letting the conveyancer be the legal expert that they are, advising the client in that personal way. So the honest answer is I don't know, but I'm terribly excited to see.
Charlotte, lending, a lot of opportunity in lending. And it's already started influencing when it comes to risk assessments and faster approvals, and you referenced that a little bit earlier. Where do you think AI will create the most value for lenders and borrowers?
I think there's a really exciting opportunity for lenders to use AI to determine the journey for borrowers. So a first-time buyer is so different to a portfolio buy-to-let landlord, and you know, like I mentioned earlier about regionality, all those differences, they're huge in terms of the borrower journey and what they want from us as a lender. Using AI to be able to determine that and to be able to support that journey throughout is really exciting. There's huge opportunities for us to tailor that mortgage process for borrowers. So that's where I think it can make the most effect. I think there's plenty of other opportunities AI can bring to the lending journey, but absolutely that tailoring of the mortgage process for each individual borrower is probably the biggest one.
I think that's a really good point, as we see the same extreme differences between first-time buyers and buy-to-let landlords and people who are dealing with probate. Their needs are so different.
Yeah.
Trav, LMS is pretty much about optimising the process. You've spoken quite passionately about that with the launch of MPTN that's come out the back of the trial. Where do you see kind of AI playing a role in this?
Yeah, it's just interesting from our point of view. I think there's two main things. I think on a very surface level, the administration that's involved in the process, that's outside kind of the expertise, particularly in the conveyances that you guys have to do day to day. A lot of that can be taken away and managed. But there's two main areas, I think, from my point of view, I think we can add a lot of value immediately. The first is around reduction of risk or early identification of risk in the process. The earlier we get access to data, the earlier we can do some decisioning, and the earlier we can learn about the case and the risk associated with it. The risk is what's causing an increase in costs in the process in terms of PI insurance for law firms, the cost of acquiring a customer for a lender. I think identifying those things earlier through AI is absolutely a relatively quick win in the scheme of what AI is going to do moving forward. And the key is that access to information. The information is now available digitally. the sooner we make some decisions on it, the sooner we can get a better result, I think. But that risk reduction for me, the removement of administration tasks in the process, seem like things that are on the horizon, that's for sure.
Alastair, from your vantage point, what about yourself? Obviously, you guys are right up front in the process. I mean, where do you see AI sort of having an impact from your perspective?
I don't think there's any doubt that AI is going to touch every element of the journey for everybody involved. And the really exciting thing for me is, we touched on it earlier, which is part of the problem is this fragmentation within the market, not just different actors, but also different data standards, different way of presenting information. And in fact, AI can almost solve that element of interoperability, because data standards almost go away. You don't need a labeling of the data and translation layers. You can feed the documents, the data, whatever it is, into the engines, and they will actually strip out that information for you and align it all. So I think that's the real thing. It's giving us, for the first time, that ability to say, actually, it doesn't matter what format you put the data in. It doesn't matter how you transmit that data to me. There's something that there can make sense of it and drag it all together.
It's interesting because we spoke earlier about challenges, and obviously AI seems to be something that's an enabler. But of course, it's not necessarily a brand new technology. It might feel new to many people, but it's actually been around for quite a bit of time. The question I want to kind of turn to now really is what challenges and specifically risks do you kind of see with AI? And I'll come to you first. So what are the risks that you see and the challenges with it?
I think it's just going back to that word of trust, isn't it? It's you are trusting data at the end of the day. You haven't got a human anymore making that decision. I think the accuracy will improve because you haven't got a human anymore making that decision. But it's absolutely that. It's trust. You're trusting a tool system to make a decision for you. And, these are big transactions. You said this isn't an Amazon purchase. This is a house that someone's purchasing. It's the biggest transaction they'll probably ever make. It's expensive. It needs to be right, and it needs to be right for that borrower. So I think it's just, and I think it's also the expense from a lender perspective to us, to bring those tools in when we have an established way of assessing documents. We have an established people, our staff, they know exactly what they're doing. We've trusted that. We've learned how to do it. We have controls in place. Bringing something new in to speed the journey up that we've never used before. I think that's a big risk as well to us, and getting that balance between the human touch and that automation of a journey. People do want speed, they want transparency, but they also want a person to talk to when it's complex, and it's making sure we balance the two. So yeah, some big challenges with bringing that sort of technology in.
Absolutely. Travis, what risks are you seeing?
Conveyancers going away from the fax machine would probably be a good place to start. I think they're quite fearful of it still. Not all conveyancers, Michelle, I promise you. I think it's misinformation, a bit of fear. I think it's not just industry, right? We've all heard, the stories around AI and how its intelligence is growing day by day, and where it'll be exponentially growing in a couple of years' time. That's fearful. People are fearful of their jobs. People are fearful what it means for them. People are fearful of Skynet taking over, like in Terminator 2. There's this misinformation in the industry that people are genuinely scared of what the unknown is and how it's going to affect their day-to-day lives. And I don't think it's an industry thing. I think it's a human thing. But I think the more we learn about it, the more we have experts come talk to us about it, the more we adopt it against smaller processes that have marginal gains and support a human in their day-to-day activity, the more we get comfortable with it. It's the same with everything else that we've adopted over time. I mean, mobile phones are another good example of that. Technology took a bit to adopt, and once we did it, it was great, and everyone uses it, and everyone's got one in their hand now. I think AI is the same. I think we'll use it for the purposes that we're comfortable with, and we get more and more comfortable all the time, and all of a sudden it'll be part and parcel of what we do day to day.
It's interesting. I am going to nick one of Pete's phrases now, because I've got the mic and he hasn't. And that is that a human with AI will always outperform a human without it. And I think that's such a poignant point here, that actually, yes, there will be challenges, there will be risks, but it's about that human touch and being a human with AI and kind of starting to use it, which is obviously something you talk about a lot. I think you've done about 8 panels in the past 2 weeks going on about this stuff. But Michelle, let me come to you. You know, as a conveyancer and a conveyancing business, you know, you are all about de-risking things. Well, everybody in this process is about de-risking things. What do you see the challenges and the risks in this?
So I think there's probably two parts to that. For me, the first part is around maturity and how everything else in our wider ecosystem continues to still marry together with AI having come in. So, for example, people's expectations for human review and human response, but also right through to, you know, insurance's ability to continue to cover us when we're using tools like this. It just is not keeping pace with the tools that are coming through. But I think secondarily, we shouldn't ignore the human challenge with regards to, you know, you touched on it then, Chris, around how a human with AI will always be better than a human without. But at the same time, there's a responsibility on that human to make sure that they've done at least an overview of, is that a sensible response? Is there something that the AI hasn't seen here, or something that I haven't made available to it that matters, that makes a difference? So I think there's a definite element of encouraging people to use it in a safe environment before we then use it in anger. And, you know, as you said, Travis, you're starting in smaller places, scaling up and making sure that we have real experience in deploying it in the right way.
I think sorry, Pete, from a conveyancing point of view, I mean, I flip a joke about fax machines, I appreciate, but honestly, I think conveyancing is a safe pair of hands. The job is to reduce risk in a transaction, support the lender and the customer to make sure we get the desired outcome. We have to make sure that everything that we're doing is helping with that risk profile. Ultimately, conveyancers are on the hook if something goes wrong. And we also enter into the process as kind of like taking the longest and doing it. But the job is to remove risk from a process to make sure when things are put through HMLI, that title's changed, it's done the right way. And I think if someone's comfortable with a fax machine or someone's comfortable with an email or a letter, industry needs to kind of promote a level of change and trust in new technology before the guys on the hook are going to adopt it. I think it's on us as you know, technology people and people bringing new technology into an industry to give them the confidence they need to be able to change. I think that's on us as an industry to do that.
I think also there's a huge challenge there, because if you look at how fragmented our industry is, there's a lot of conveyancers out there that haven't got the skill set in-house to be, you know, au fait with all of the cybersecurity solutions that they should be looking at, or all of the AI options that are available out there. And that's completely understandable. How do we cross that barrier?
I think we could have touched on centralised networks and centralised ways of working, principles. You know, there is enough technology providers out there, there's enough trusted sources out there to create a new way of working. But it's going to take some time. I think you're absolutely right. It is on us. You know, we're the ones kind of out here pushing change and working towards a more digital end-to-end transaction we're all talking about in this room. But there's people out there go, hang on, that creates risk for me. That creates a new process. I don't understand it. And that education piece is just as important as the technology advances we're seeing in the process. And sometimes I think we underestimate that.
Yeah, and a bit of a follow-up question, and I'll perhaps come to you, Alastair, on this one. How does regulation really play into this challenge that poses when it comes to AI?
It's almost difficult to foresee, isn't it? I think we'll certainly see our markets and the European markets regulate more heavily than other markets. And I think a lot of that is down to the fear factor. And let's be honest, right? So even the people who've developed these models don't really understand how they work, so it's a black box. I think the real danger is that we start to hold AI to a higher bar than we hold people. We're already seeing it with things like self-driving cars, with the Teslas. They crash, somebody gets injured, and let's get them off the road, let's do all these tests, because it made a mistake. Yet how many times have we driven and made mistakes, and you see accidents all the time, which is probably more dangerous. So we've just got to be very careful not to block the AI through fear, and almost hold it at that level of, is it as accurate as a human or better? And if it is, then we're in a safe place.
I'm going to round up on the AI part now because we've got some audience questions, but just to summarise a few key points. Michelle, you pointed out really, really early on that you should test quickly with AI because that's the best way to learn what works and what doesn't. I couldn't agree more. It's become accessible because technology is cheap to test in a safe way. But I also take your point that from a almost cottage industry side of things, that quite a large number of conveyancers are small. They don't have CTOs. They don't have people who are responsible for understanding this technology, and therefore they're almost having to work it out on the fly. And it's hard, and so we as an industry almost need to do better to provide a framework in which they can operate in and give them the realms in which they can operate. My final concluding point is on that Humans 101. Re-say my favourite phrase that Chris stole. But humans in the loop is the answer, and it's the answer that's been applied across industry to industries that are taking on AI faster than perhaps our industry is. But humans in the loop means that humans are the experts. They're allowed to be the experts. They are the people who are rubber stamping the responses. They are consulting AI in the right way, but they are still the experts. AI is going to overtake humans. It will, in terms of ability. It's actually not that far away, but it's not there yet. So right now, as an industry, we do need to keep humans in the loop, and every single person we advise is, look, keep that human in the loop. Partially because your indemnity insurance will not cover you if you advise them wrong, but secondly because it's the right thing to do. So that's kind of my final parting thought there. So we are going to turn to some audience questions now.
Thank you very much. So I know I submitted a question prior to today, but I think you've covered well the blockers to driving true transformation in the home buying and selling journey and how we can address these challenges in the conversation today. So I'm going to be a bit naughty, which is typical for those that know me, and ask a different question, and hopefully a very topical question. So the cat has truly been set amongst the pigeons with the SRA consultation on the future of client money in the legal industry. How does the panel view this consultation? Does it help or hinder the digital transformation in this space?
Michelle, have you got anything to?
So I think, like anything, it's an opportunity to explore the art of the possible, and I think it will come, whether we want it to or not. So we're looking at it from the point of view of all the benefits that it can bring to clients on completion day. We don't want to be fighting completions at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's not the journey that we're aiming for. So anything that helps that has got to be a good thing for our client and help us to provide a service that we can be proud of, that we can stand by from a legal advice perspective. I think the challenges come in, again, we go back to, is it one solution that everybody has to sign up to, or is it flexible solutions where we, for example, could onboard that and it doesn't matter if 3 or 4 people further down the chain haven't. So I think there's some interesting nuances in there in terms of how it actually plays out.
Anybody else got anything to add to that? No?
Nobody wants synchronised.
Yeah. Well, Claire, you know my views on this anyway. But moving money in a property transaction between multiple bank accounts, between different providers in today's digital age is highly risky. I appreciate that there are elements of that which it triggers part of the process, but we inevitably we're going to have to move away from this because, interestingly, the stats show us that the vast majority of frauds that take place are actually to those digital natives. They're just kind of sending the money, or they think they're sending the money to the solicitor, and actually they're not. They've been infiltrated in some way. So, there's always going to be a risk somewhere, but I think that genuinely this stuff's got to change, and I think that it will happen. We know that the Bank of England's project through synchronisation is obviously something that's in the mix. It's on the agenda. For those that don't know, synchronisation is the idea of transferring basically the movement of the money and the lodgement of the title happening synchronously at the same time, and that being managed by a central bank. So it's going to come, I think that the things that have happened with the SRA just shows that pathway is being laid.
Sorry, you going to go ahead?
Well, I was just going to say, from that perspective, I mean, really the technology already exists, which is distributed ledgers, smart contracts, and tokenisation. That's the way it should be going.
And I think that's the other thing. I touched on the synchronisation piece there, but we've also got the concepts of the RLN, which is the Regulated Liability Network, which is another proof of concept, which is now moving into different phases. These are things that we're quite close to at Novus, and we're seeing kind of what's happening. But it's going to change. I think is the summary, Trav.
I was just going to say, it's not a problem in isolation. So there's a whole industry being stood up from commoditized products and interests and stuff that underpin the commercial model that exists within the industry. So I fully expect that this is going to change, but along with that change comes a new way of working across some of these stakeholder groups. There's obviously a lot of water that needs to go underneath the bridge at different parts of the process to make synchronization a real thing. But I'm with you, I think it's going to change, but I think looking at it in isolation as a problem is going to cause some issues for some key actors in the process that need to be addressed.
Question 2, we've got a person who couldn't make it here tonight from Sute, and they ask, how disruptive does the panel believe a transition into end-to-end online property transactions by buyers and sellers could have on the traditional way of property buying and selling, especially with the new generation of young people?
I mean, my hope would that we would end up with a pretty liquid market. In an ideal world, you have somebody buy, sell a house, then go and find the next house, and everything happens within a space of a few weeks. And if you get to that point, then actually you can do the whole journey online, and you sort of disintermediate lots of people within that process. So I think that's the way it will, in an ideal world, it would end up. Now, whether we get the regulation and the frameworks that allow us to get there is another question.
I think I'd really like to see house buying not being the most stressful thing that anybody ever does anymore, that they can really look forward to choosing their first home, their next home, their last home, and for it to be an enjoyable experience. You know, it's a known process, it builds towards a known climax in a reasonable timescale that it's just a joyous experience to move in and enjoy what they set out to do.
Yeah, just quickly, I was just going to add around, obviously there's different countries do things different ways. I think I was at a forum a few weeks ago and they were talking around transactions do take about 2 weeks, and it's very unusual for it to not take that length of time. They use a lot of bridging loans, and that sort of pricked my ears up a little bit. I thought that was a very interesting approach. It's something we absolutely don't do in the UK. So there's different ways, isn't there, of speeding that journey up. It's not necessarily just about the data and getting things as quick as possible. It's about what's right for the borrower. What do we need to do that's going to make that journey simple for them? What's their preference? So, but you're absolutely right that sometimes there's chains they're so long that it's how do you, at what point, at what sort of parameter around that borrower and that part of the chain are we looking at, or is it a full length potential? It could be 20 in a chain up to I saw one years ago, and I think there was something like 60 people sat all waiting. Yeah, I'm going back a long time. It was about 15 years ago, but they knew everyone in this chain, this couple, because it was in a local area or something. But yeah, I think it's. Yeah, there's a lot we can do to just improve that journey, but not all of it's just around speeding the journey up or digitising it. So.
Yeah, just okay, took the words out of my mouth. I think we can make it quicker. We can make it more transparent. I don't want anyone thinking that the process doesn't work today. It does. People still move home every day, right? And we've had a really busy year this year. Capacity of the industry has not been an issue. We've been able to move people from properties, but nail on the head is it's the most stressful thing someone can do. It is disjointed. There is duplication of the process. It is frustrating. At the very least, in a very, very short period of time, we should be able to remove some of those frustrations just by removing duplication. So I think when we look at this process and this problem at some point, you can look at it and go, geez, it's too hard to fix. Like, it's just a big thing to do. But there's genuinely little steps we can take today to make it a little bit easier. And if we've done one thing well in this country, we set the expectation it takes 6 months to move home. I was in my local village in June. There was a big sign in the estate agency's windows going, "Move in time for Christmas." It's like buying a couch, right? I thought, we've done this really well, right? People now expect it takes that long. People expect it's going to be that difficult. So I think the new breed of customer coming through, that digital native customer, it's a good chance to reset expectation about a new process, a new way of working. As they become more mature and the technology does and the process does, then we can really do something a bit special. But I think taking that first step and just getting started is what we need to do today.
Just wrapping that up, the question obviously was all about kind of, the new generation of young people and how disruptive is this going to be. Interestingly, kind of moving it away from them for a second, there's two opportunities that this stuff provides. One is that it will improve the process to which we've all been talking about. But actually, let's talk about the in-life experience. When you have a mortgage and you've moved into the property and everything's there, you kind of don't really hear from the lender much after that other than your annual statements. And then when your remo comes through, what this stuff is going to do is enable you to actually begin to be able to offer in-life products, in-life experiences by way of being able to see what goes on. That's kind of and I think in answer to the person that asked that question, they're the benefits that it's going to bring to this kind of next generation. And I think there's two parts to that. That's what I just wanted to kind of share, because that's actually really important, and there's masses of opportunity actually once the transaction's done in life, because things change, people's lives changes as they're in life inside of the mortgage, and this does provide a lot of opportunity.
Wouldn't it be great as well, Chris, is that if once the information's been used to complete a transaction is kept and reused the next time that property is being transacted, like in a property passport or something along those lines. You know, once the data is digital, once it's being trusted, these things become possibility. But wouldn't it be great? Like, oh, right, this happened 3 years ago. Why would you use the information again? It's been updated through regular sources throughout the journey. In life, great, but actually this information used to fund and you know, explain the next transaction is absolutely in the art of the possible. Yeah. We're getting there.
Yeah, I'd agree, totally. Next question.
Right, next we have a question from Stephen Ball, who I think's in the crowd and may follow up from this. Stephen asks, what are we expecting from the Open Property Data Association?
I think our best place for it. I think they have got the right bunch of people in a room who are prepared to work collaboratively to try and find a way forward. They're led very, very well. They've got the right stakeholders represented in that group. And they're doing something practical and tangible, which is the trust framework that sits underneath it. I think there's other industry groups that have talked quite conceptually about how to make things better. But I think the OPDA, from my point of view, are taking very practical steps to try new things and engage with the right people in order to make a difference. Whether that's lobbying government to working with industry partners and leaders to look at ways and means where we can bring new products and services to life. So LMS are part of the OPDA. We have been one of the founding members as part of that organisation. But that's the difference, I think, for me, is they are taking practical steps in live environments to make things better. So the expectation is that they, I think for me, on a very basic level, they keep investing in the property data trust framework. They get more people involved, more industry leaders involved, and they work to a singular set of principles that can help us deliver a singular digital end-to-end process.
Anybody else like to add to that?
Only briefly. Only briefly, I was just going to say, some of the calls I've been on where we've, on OPDA has been discussed on there. I think it's about knowing and being open and honest that there is a lot to go at. It's a big, big journey for everyone, but prioritising what's really important across all different sort of parts of that journey, so lenders, estate agents, and just saying, right, which bits do we need to go at first, and making sure we have a bit of focus on it. They'll absolutely bring that focus. Otherwise, everyone's just going off in their own sort of silos and trying to work on what they think is the priority. I think that's what that'll bring, and it'll be really helpful.
Anybody else got anything to add to that? I think one thing I would add to that in terms of expectation is, obviously the property data trust framework is there. We can see that there's live trials and it being tested. But there's an expectation there to collaborate with policymakers around this. And we can see that there's things such as the data bill, which is being heard and sort of coming through. And I think there's an expectation really there that the OPDA will be able to but perhaps support that, and we've seen that some of the members there obviously were interviewed or part of panels where this stuff's being investigated. So there's certainly an expectation from our side that they're going to be, at the forefront of that and helping kind of drive data standards through, really. I think that concludes the questions that were said. Does anybody have any questions or a question that they would like to pose?
It's kind of a two-parter, so I apologise. So firstly, it's more of particularly around like buyers and sellers. So Pete mentioned particularly about like first-time buyers, for example, who are coming through university, let's say, use like AI technology. And the speed of process is probably going to be more familiar to them, but talking about particularly like so like landlords that own multiple properties that are used to like the very disjointed process that takes a while, it's sort of like building trust, I think, because I think sometimes, particularly with the process, like it kind of can sound too good to be true, so sort of communicating that. And then secondly, particularly within the process, is with how siloed it is and with it, working. We've talked about how you can improve it, but what are some of the big pain points in communicating that to, across the board to people who, Charlotte mentioned particularly with being like lenders, like it's the whole standardization, everything can be quite difficult for a lender, whereas like kind of communicating that across between sort of each silo to sort of help that work together. What do you think, like how that's going to work?
I think I'd have learned how to use this by now, wouldn't you? But, yeah, I'd agree. I think communication is key. So I think to your first part, absolutely. If we don't communicate to the brokers who submit buy-to-let portfolio business, for example, telling them what we're doing, what changes we're making and why is really important, so they know what's coming in the journey, why we've made those changes and what benefit we think that will add to their process. I think to your second part, I think you're also right. I think that's probably the biggest challenge is, like you say, everyone does work in silo. I think it's things like this and bringing people together that actually make you more aware of what's happening outside of just the mortgage application process. For me, this is huge. It gives me that opportunity to sort of think a bit wider than just the lending journey. So I think things like this, communicating more, things such as like OPDA, the work you're doing, I think it's just making sure we're all having a say and inputting into that and getting from it what we need as well. So, yeah.
Just to add to the second question, the second part of your question, it's a trusted network. The answer is getting all those individual players working in a singular way through a trusted network that's got the distribution to reach the far corners of the industry. That exists today. The more people that feed into it, the more interoperability we'll get. And I'm not talking about the LMS product here. We've got one that does these things, what I mentioned before, but it doesn't matter which network or platform it is. It is around that kind of centralized network that's underpinned by a level of trust and data trust. For me, that's how we get interoperability. That's how we get the silos working closely together. The lenders don't have to talk to each other. There's conveyancers don't have to talk to each other. Estate agents don't have to talk to each other. But they've got to talk to somebody. That information has got to be stored centrally somewhere where people can access it. And that's where that centralized network and that people can access data from becomes vitally important. And I think that's where we are today.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to say before I give you my thoughts? I think we just about survived with the microphones there, but just to wrap up on the first part of your question, and it's an area I'm particularly interested in because there's a huge element of behavioural psychology that sits behind it, in the fact that there are portions of this industry that are resistant to move forward and to speed things up. There is no qualms about that. I've sat on various meetings, various panels, where people have said, well, even if we do speed up the process, what's the point? Why does it matter? People moving house, it doesn't matter. But to go to your point, the expectations moved. And to go to your point, Michelle, that you made earlier, it is stressful moving house. It puts people off. And actually, it's poor for the economy. If you look at and again, the point was made earlier, the fastest moving economies move house fast. It's the biggest movement of cash between people and between people in a society that there is. And therefore, we have a responsibility as an industry to facilitate that. You're absolutely right, though. There are people who are against it. Now, what will start to happen will be what happened to high street banks 10 years ago when they were disrupted by the likes of Monzo, Revolut, Starling. And that will start to happen. In fact, we're in conversations where people are starting to talk about what their mortgage offering is within the neobanks. And when that starts to happen, things will speed up exponentially because lenders will sit up and take note. In a previous life, we were advising high street lenders at the crunch point when mobile was hitting, and the history is going to repeat itself. And so our advice to everyone that we're working with is kind of you need to be considering all of the things we've talked about today, the movements in technology, and start to move faster, because if you don't, someone else will, and they'll take your dinner off the table. And that's kind of a concluding point on the question.
I think just to pick up on that, and the psychology point is interesting. If you think the single biggest reason why house sales fall through is because people change their mind, and it's most of the time it's just natural, right? So whenever you buy something, you get buyer's remorse. With this is the biggest purchase you're ever going to make. Then you add the extended timeline, so the longer that goes on, the more likely they are to have that remorse. The more stressful you are, the more likely they have that remorse. I think a lot of people, when they look at the silos and they think, well, actually, it doesn't really affect me, but it does, because we're all missing out on transactions. Estate agents aren't making money because transactions are falling through. Conveyancers aren't getting paid because it's not going through. Lenders. So it's in all of our interests to fix this, but I'm not sure that everybody always realises that.
It cost the industry £250 million last year. That was what was estimated in terms of lost efficiency in the process. We know over a third of transactions never complete to the point, but in that 6-7 months, not just remorse, I think, but things change, right? Yeah, life changes. There's kids, there's family, there's redundancies. Like, that shorter period of time does remove the risk in the process, and we know that because we see that point of exchange being a really, really critical point in the process. We know when to get to exchange, the level of cancellations drops drastically. There's that kind of commitment in that kind of that psyche, that mindset, that once you're there, you're done, you're moving forward. The quicker we can get to that point, I think we can remove some of those issues and really reduce some of that wastage in the process for us all. Yeah, particularly for the conveyancer. There's a lot of money being spent, a lot of time being spent to get to a point, and all of a sudden it kind of backs out. So there's so much we can do around that. And I think it's where speed does play a part for industry to make us all more efficient.
Do we have any more last questions before we wrap?
Yeah, so I'm not from this background. I'm from a sort of product-driven manufacturing background. But I sort of bought my first house this year, and it was a painful process. What I'm sort of struggling to see are like the cons of this, because sort of obviously in business you're either offering a product or a service. Each of you and your organisations are offering a service, but together you're selling a product. So the customer journey is surely what's the most important thing. And sort of if it was me looking at this from a manufacturing background, I'm sure you've all had, a very busy year, and it's busy is great. But to me, for that supply and demand, I'd be wanting to I'd want to get my invoices out quicker so that we could make more money, because the demand is there and the supply is almost what's stopping your bottom line getting bigger, each of you. So just so I can get a bit of a sort of better understanding, if we achieved sort of a full digital sort of timeline, sort of if any, but which bit of your organisation would be worse off, or if any, would it have a detrimental effect to any part of each of your organisations?
I mean, from my perspective, no. I mean, if the whole industry was completely end-to-end, digital, efficient processes, the interoperability, there is no negative to it. I think the challenge in getting there is we're all talking to each other, we all want to do it. But there are thousands of different estate agents, lots of conveyancers, different lenders. It's getting them all into the same place. They all want to do it, but if they all want to do it in a slightly different way, then it breaks down. And because of the system of chains that we've got, it only requires one element of that chain not to be within that process to make the whole process fallible, and therefore it doesn't work. And this is where, in an ideal world, you'd have the government mandating this is going to be the process and this is going to how it's going to be done. Until that point, we've got to make the best of the playing field that's been created.
I think I'd agree. I can't think of a negative for us. It would be great to get people moving more quickly, process more cases, but we are restricted by the level of information we can acquire at the beginning. So, for example, with searches, that's not data that's available digitally yet. That would really help, and number of other similar examples. So it's not, as you say, not due to a lack of wanting to, but so many moving parts to try and pull together, and a lack of consistency around what good looks like. And I'd say on that point that I really don't want to stifle product innovation, because obviously that's what I'm all about. But at the same time, it's got to be for value. So getting that balance between consistency and that sort of level playing field in the right places and allowing innovation in others is a really tricky balance.
The only con I can think of, really, for me, cards on the table, is the cost of adoption. It's not cheap to go through a full industry change like this, and the amount of money and resources required to get to a point where something like this is happening on scale is not to be stifled at. The beauty about that is technology is getting cheaper. Pete, you mentioned that before. We're getting more mature with our thinking. There's more people involved in this process now. And once we reach a critical mass, I think that cost of adoption will get quite low and actually make it quite easy for the tail of the estate agencies and the conveyancers and lenders and all those things who maybe don't invest in these things as enough to make it a bit more palatable for that. But right now, people are pitching revolution in terms of this is a brand new way and we're going to throw everything away and start again, and that's a huge bit of work. But actually what's required right now is more like evolution. It is about using what we've got today, using the digitization that's already happened within the silos and just pulling it together in a singular process. I think personally, if we can reduce the cost of adoption for these individual stakeholders, we'll start seeing that adoption grow very, very quickly and exponentially.
I think that the demand is there in terms of I've just turned 25 and sort of my generation and a lot of first-time buyers and a lot of them are older than me is if we had, look, we don't who even watches telly anymore. I'm sure everybody here watches more things on demand than they do on terrestrial TV because it's a case of, well, I don't want to watch adverts. I'll watch a program when I want to watch it, not when it's on. I'd imagine with the demand, if somebody said to me, it's completely digital, it's quicker, it's going to cost you 10% more, for that cost of innovation, I think a lot of people would probably go, all right, I'll take the 10% hit, but at least it's done.
Yeah, but unless everybody's doing the same thing, your 10% means nothing because you're part of a chain. So this is where that process kind of breaks down a little bit, which is why that kind of mass adoption in terms of everyone working to a single set of principles kind of, I think, adds a lot of value to it. I think what you're talking about is absolutely right. I think people are already starting to pay for premium services and quicker access to product and service and data. There's new products coming to the market all the time. You mentioned searches before. We're search indemnity now, or there's no search, and lenders are starting to think about how they can manage those problems differently. I think there's innovation is happening to find a way to get around some of these problems, but from my personal point of view, and Alastair, I'm sure you have a view on this as well, until we can start affecting chains and complete chains in a way that everyone's working to a singular way, we might get to exchange quicker, we might have a better customer journey, we might reduce some of the friction and the cancellation rates, but are we going to get people moving to the houses faster? The answer is probably not until we get to a critical mass, is my personal opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think also picking up on the cost point, if you look at the markets which are very, very efficient and have all those processes up front and things like that, they do also have higher transaction costs. So you're paying estate agents far more money in the US or Australia or Norway than you are here. But that is the trade-off. But I think taking that cost on board, the benefits are so much greater than the costs.
Ash, you got something?
Hi guys, I thought I'd be clever. I asked AI, what is the best question to ask a panel of experts about the UK home buying process? The answer was, what is the most common mistakes first-time buyers make in the UK? So AI doesn't quite get it right, does it? It's got no context to my question. So that was a quick observation, really, just to bring AI into real life. I guess the other question, we haven't really spoken customer experience. At the end of the day, somebody's buying a house, and Michelle, you mentioned after divorce and death, it's the most stressful thing. What about an app that connects the chain? So there's a push notification saying you need to do this, or the reason why your delay is this. So actually, you're joining up the people buying houses.
I would love for that to be a thing, especially if it wasn't a mandated this platform. You know, you had that interoperability and the option to have a seamless integration no matter what you're coming from. But the fact of the matter is that we don't see any desire from other side solicitors particularly, also some estate agents, to digitally engage with us. So from our point of view, on an open framework, yeah, great. But again, we're back to critical mass and fragmentation within the market. So it's a wonderful idea, and wouldn't it make life easier? But I just think how we get there and what that solution looks like is such a tricky problem.
I think those apps do exist. I don't think the problem is the apps not existing. It's the underlying data rails aren't there to support the apps. So you've got the apps giving you alerts, but the data is incomplete or inaccurate. It's the data layer that we've got to fix.
think, I love the idea though. I mean, as a borrower, it shouldn't matter who the estate agent is, who the valuer is, who the lender is, the conveyancer. You should just have one app that is your home purchase app, and being able to, be alerted whenever the next stage is progressed would be amazing. But going back to the points we've made earlier, it's about everyone has to collaborate, and we've all got to work together to do that. Otherwise, it's just going to continue in silos. But that is a perfect end state, isn't it? So.
Just to add, if solicitors don't want to engage with each other, or estate agents don't want to engage with each other, or even lenders don't, because it's competition, they shouldn't have to. But there should be a way they can exchange data with a trusted partner so everyone gets what they need out of it. So if we can take away and make that engagement easier so people still get access to the information they need to make informed decisions, which is back to that kind of centralised network and the data rails that you mentioned before, Alastair, we can remove some of that friction. I think, again, we need to be building processes that allow those with a level of digital immaturity to access digital products and services so they can keep pace. Capacity is really important in the industry. We don't talk about that enough. If we start setting a standard here and everyone needs to abide by it, you're going to lose a lot of people in the industry who currently, do a lot of the work, right? Do a lot of the grunt work. The industry can't afford to do that, so we have to bring them on the journey with us. So whatever we do as an industry, that critical mass is really, really important. But there is ways and means we can surface data with a very, very low entry point in terms of cost in a way that people can kind of work interoperably.
Well, that pretty much concludes our 50th episode of the Digital Disruption podcast. Before we close out, I'm going to come to each of the panel and ask the important question. In your opinion, in very few words, less than 30 seconds, Trav, will a full end-to-end digital home buying and selling experience become a reality?
Absolutely. Look, it has to for a number of reasons.
Absolutely was fine.
Yeah, that's fine. Just to say, if it's not, I'm wasting a hell of a lot of my life trying to make it a reality, so I don't really like doing that. But look, the building blocks are there. We're doing it today. It exists. It's not concept anymore. It's live. All it's going to take is a little bit more people kind of understanding that this is not a concept anymore. It's not fiction. We're here. It's now. It's time.
Charlotte?
It has to, absolutely. Hopefully before I'm long gone. But yeah, it does. I mean, like you say, with the wheels are in motion. It feels like we're heading in the right direction. It feels like, we're all sat here saying exactly the same thing, and that's not something that's happened before. We have all worked in silos, but you're seeing that change. It's definitely starting to progress. More importantly, will Liverpool win the league this season? Very important question. Don't ask AI.
Alastair?
I think without question it will. I think the unknown bit is how long it's going to take. But I do think we'll make continual progress towards it, so we will see improvements even before we get to that point.
And finally, Michelle.
I think it's more of a question of when than if. But I hope it will be in such a way that the legal advice given by the conveyancer gets to be the cherry on the cake and not just another grind of the process that has to happen.
Well, that does conclude the episode, or our 50th episode of this podcast. Huge thanks to the live audience that came out tonight to join us. And can we have just a round of applause for our fabulous panel? Thank you.
Thank you.